Accessibility can be the difference between me throwing my controller down in rage or finding genuine pride in the games I complete. If a game is too hard or seems unfair, I will not be motivated or encouraged to keep trying. This is nothing special. When I play a game with responsive mechanics and a difficulty curve that perfectly matches what I want, I feel incredible. However, not every person wants the same thing in their video games, so it's impossible for a developer to perfectly tailor their game to everyone. Instead, they try to make their games accessible to as many as possible. Innately, accessibility is an excellent thing. From a marketing perspective, making a game that everyone can enjoy seems better than only targeting those who will dedicate themselves to developing a lot of skill. People have busy lives, and many may not want to exert themselves while playing a hobby. Regardless of the reason, including different ways to make a game accessible will encourage more people to experiment with it. At the same time, it is important for the game to be rewarding for the players who want that additional level of challenge. I have played far too many games where I get bored before the game is even over because I was not being stimulated. Specifically, in the later half of the Tarnishing of Juxtia, I completely surpassed the level of my enemies. Instead of strategically considering my plan of action, I would just brute force my way through important moments. This made the experience far less special and did not give me the same release that I feel in more challenging games. While it may seem impossible to perfectly balance this difficulty dilemma in gaming, today on Zeal we are going to shed some insight on the concept of accessibility. Specifically, we will focus on how some games encourage mastery while also stimulating players who do not devote excessive time to the game. The first thing that comes to my mind when discussing accessibility is modern re-releases of old arcade games. Many developers who update these titles include save states, which give the player the option of making their own checkpoints in addition to the ones the game provides. Moreover, they typically offer unlimited continues, yet again letting the player decide how they want to play the game. I often like these systems in older game collections like the Wonder Boy collection. Likewise, I also enjoy playing with unlimited continues in games like Cotton Fantasy or QYO Blaster. While I think these mechanics effectively make pre-existing games more accessible, I do not think they work well objectively. Completing a level after constantly using save states or rewinding time does not feel very rewarding. I often look forward to rigid level structure and enjoy playing experiences that the developer set for me. That way, it feels like I played through all the experiences that the developer intended. Including these options as the default settings comes across as the developers recommending their use. It seems that the base game should not be played without them. Thus, including accessibility in this way makes me question what the developer envisioned. Additionally, including these options often comes across as more of a temptation than a resource. I find myself feeling disappointed when I use them. Moreover, I rarely encourage myself to get better at the game or understand the gameplay mechanics when I usually would. Instead, I rewind time to fix the tiny mistake I made, failing to further master the mechanics. Without understanding or acknowledging a developer's intended amount of leeway, I feel less satisfied and don't push myself to improve. I much prefer when developers segment their games themselves. That way, I still feel like I'm experiencing the game in a sizable chunk without being overwhelmed by the scope of the game. Shadow Gangs does this well, offering a level-by-level mode that still features a restricted number of continues in addition to its arcade mode. I enjoyed how even in making this game accessible, the developer of Shadow Gangs maintained their vision, which made me feel excited when I finally completed a section. The Love series takes this concept and flips it on its head. There are various distinct levels that I can get through with unlimited checkpoints. If I wanted to, I could place a checkpoint after every step I take. However, the game encouraged me to complete the level within a certain number of attempts. This meant that I could opt into an additional challenge once I felt I was ready, further showing my mastery of the game. I found that both options worked well to both incentivize my continued playing and to maintain the vision of the developer. Obviously, these alterations do not impact the base experience as much as a rewind function, so the respective games may not be as accessible. However, these structures make accessibility the standard option. This means they don't diminish my satisfaction as much as games with one. Plus, I'm still encouraged to hone my skills and improve tangibly at the game. I think offering additional tries from the checkpoints made the game more digestible without decreasing the happiness I get from overcoming the obstacles. At the same time, sometimes it's easier just to alter the entire experience than fine-tune specific parts of an already existing difficult journey. Many games offer pre-made difficulty options, which provides multiple angles from which to begin the game. These are helpful most of the time, and they work well as a foundation for accessibility. However, they rarely explain the differences between the options, and many games don't encourage me to push myself and find the option best suited for me. For example, when I played through Virtua Fighter's arcade mode, I had to select my difficulty without figuring out what each meant. I didn't like that. I wanted to know about the developer's intended playthrough, and what each difficulty option entailed. I rarely know which difficulty to select unless the developer explains what each offers. In Virtua Fighter, I was left wondering for far too long. Plus, I couldn't tell if I selected the correct difficulty until it was too late to change. To try and counteract this, some developers include brief blurbs to explain which difficulty would be best applicable. As soon as I began Spider Swords, I had to select a difficulty option. In this case, there was a simple paragraph that explained the different options and helped give me a general sense of direction. The same thing happened in Bleed 2. These developers explained the difficulty modes and showed what they were intended for. Unfortunately, in both examples, I missed a crucial piece of information that I want to know. Which one should I play? Which experience does the developer want me to play? Sure, it might be difficult, but which experience is the best? Maybe this is not as crucial as I make it out to be, and maybe the developer shouldn't have an opinion on how I play the game. But still, I find that developers know what makes their game special, and they'll be able to guide me down a path that makes the game more fun. Thus, I appreciate it when I see a notice that says a certain option is recommended. Plus, even though accessibility features are great, I think it's helpful to put them in an alternate menu to keep them from tempting me unless the developer recommends them or I feel I need them. While both Bleed 2 and Spider Swords have solid ways of telegraphing the differences between their difficulty modes, Wally and the Fantastic Predators blows them out of the water. To start, there are 4 different difficulty settings to choose from. The game differentiates from the others I mentioned because under each is a description of what is changed, who the developer thinks should play it, and then the developer also adds his own recommendation. It works great. However, the game's devotion to accessibility doesn't end there. Wally and the Fantastic Predators feature some alternate modes that make the game easier but also rework the key mechanics. Instead of including these modes alongside the others, the developer physically separates them, denoting the difference in their content and that they are not the experience he intended. This clarity helped keep me engaged in the title even after I had played through these alternate adventures, as I wanted to play through the traditional modes. Plus, I ended up enjoying the original experience more too, since I knew that I was working towards something that the developer thought was worth my time. Sometimes, including accessibility options is not as impactful as including additional challenge. Super Cable Boy opts to include both, but hides the accessibility options in the settings menu. Instead, the developer made the campaign accessible while also including additional collectibles for those interested. Many games do the same thing, and I think these collectibles help garner interest from people who need additional motivation while also keeping a fair level of challenge for those who do not want to go above and beyond. At the same time, I think these collectibles also impact players by just existing. When I see another task that I could do, I focus on obtaining that, even if the goal ahead is simpler without it. Thus, if I decide not to collect a collectible, the level gets easier and seemingly more accessible without changing the base level of challenge. These items help not only tailor the game to more people, but keep players from getting overly frustrated when they choose to reduce their initial scope, as completing the level without the item is obviously still an achievement. Now, I want to talk about Gun Devil. The game actually inspired me to write the video, because I was so blown away by how they managed accessibility. Looking at it now, it's very similar to how I felt in Super Cable Boy. At the end of each level in Gun Devil, I would obtain any of 3 medallions. One was found for doing the bare minimum, another was found for taking out all the enemies, and the final one was making it through a level unscathed. These worked so well because I was motivated to replay most of the levels and find those additional medals. At the same time, when I got frustrated or I was ready to move on, I could. These various additional challenges helped keep the game accessible while maintaining the developer's vision and stimulating every level of player. The final type of accessibility I want to discuss is when the game alters its current state to accommodate a struggling player. The first example that comes to mind is Will You Snail. In this game, an artificial intelligence judges me and decides what level of difficulty would best suit me based on my progress. The first key thing that stood out to me from other games is that the adjustment of difficulty was automatic. Instead of recommending that I switch to a different difficulty, the game changed it itself. I think it worked well. It never made me feel weak for altering the difficulty, and once I had become more well versed in the mechanics, I could revisit old stages to complete them on higher difficulties. However, the only reason this worked well was because the plotline facilitated such events. The artificial intelligence would claim that he was getting bored, or he would want to make the challenge more difficult for himself. This creativity made me appreciate this feature much more. In Ninja Gaiden 3, Razor's Edge, a message continually appeared when I died too frequently. It reminded me that I could alter the difficulty. Of course, reminding me the first time makes sense, and I honestly appreciated it. However, it became incessant, to the point where I felt judged for dying as much as I did. It made it seem like the developers wanted me to play on an easier difficulty when I was struggling. That in turn came across to me as though the difficult options were not worth my time investment, especially when I kept dying. While I wanted to experience the game on a more difficult mode, I eventually caved and played the game on an easier difficulty. Though this was very similar to the accessibility option in Will You Snail, it did not resonate with me as much, because without a plotline explaining why I should alter the difficulty, it seems like the game can fully be realized on a lower difficulty. In terms of a base game, I think it is practically impossible to accommodate every player. However, many developers have implemented successful accessibility tools to help the player decide what kind of challenge they want to face. Though many struggle with rewarding the player in the same way as a game without accessibility features, including strict and detailed explanations of difficulty options, adding additional challenges for players to perform, and implementing these functions into the game world help keep games accessible without restricting as much of the satisfaction that comes with completion. Thank you so much for watching.